If I fix this helicopter, will you really kiss me right now? Her voice sliced through the aircraft hangar, cold, sharp, and polished like a freshly honed blade. DeAndre Miller looked up from the mop, still dripping dirty water. Before him, the Airbus H-145 sat motionless under the glaring floodlights, its engine cover yawning open like a wound waiting to be healed. Less than 30 feet away stood Sloane Harrington, CEO of Harrington Aerodynamics. Arms crossed, her steely gray eyes swept over the lineup of engineers, crisp shirts, ID badges swinging neatly, before stopping on the janitor in oil-stained overalls. Are you staring at the helicopter because you like it? Or because you're daydreaming about being a pilot? A burst of laughter erupted among the engineers. Someone whistled. Someone else lifted a phone to record, eager for entertainment. DeAndre didn't answer. He simply lowered his head and kept mopping in silence. But when he looked up again, his eyes no longer belonged to a janitor. They were the eyes of an engineer, a man who once kept military helicopters flying in the middle of war. This time, he didn't just stare. He reached for the engine panel. Because behind that decision wasn't pride, nor the bruised ego of a man mocked in public. It was a 7-year-old girl named Aaliyah, sitting alone at home in a dimly lit room, soldering circuit wires under a flickering desk lamp. And tonight, she had the most important robotics competition of her life. This is the story of a man who once repaired aircraft under fire, of a cold-hearted CEO who had never once uttered the words, "I'm sorry," and of the moment they both discovered that sometimes what needs fixing most isn't the engine, but the heart. If you believe that even the smallest acts can change a life forever, hit subscribe so you won't miss stories like this one. Now tell me, what do you think will happen when the man the world looked down on lays his hands on the one helicopter no one else could fix? Sloane Harrington was born into a family that lived among the clouds. Her father, Charles Harrington, built Harrington Aerodynamics from 2 rented hangars in Houston and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar civilian helicopter empire. Her mother, Veronica Lane, was a flight instructor, a woman with eyes as sharp as blades and a smile that appeared only on rare occasions. Veronica left when Sloane was 9. Not for another man, not because she stopped loving her daughter, but because the sky called to her in a way no one could ever understand. 3 years later, Veronica's small aircraft went down over the Gulf of Maine during a storm. They found the wreckage. They never found her. From that day on, Sloane learned one thing: love is temporary. Excellence is not. She graduated top of her class from Wharton at 22. When her father suffered a minor stroke at 28, Sloane stepped into the CEO's chair without hesitation. Within 6 years, she had pulled Harrington Aerodynamics back from the brink of bankruptcy, extinguished 3 major lawsuits, and turned the Harrington name into a symbol of precision and discipline across the aviation industry. The media called her the Ice Queen of Houston. She never denied it. Sloane appeared in razor-sharp blazers, walked with a straight back, and spoke in short sentences that left no room for rebuttal. From her top-floor office overlooking the Ellington Field testing facility, she watched prototype helicopters come to life and be destroyed every day. She lived alone in a glass penthouse in Uptown, near the Galleria. No pets, no plants, no one waiting for her to come home. She woke at 5, ran 10 kilometers along Buffalo Bayou, drank black coffee, reviewed financial reports, and was at her desk before 7:30. Her personal phone had only 3 numbers: her assistant, Priya Nader, her lawyer, Jordan Ellis, and Gloria Ruiz, the nurse who cared for her father. 3 numbers, That was enough. Her days were measured in contracts, deadlines, and competitors eliminated from the race. At night, she appeared at glittering galas and spoke at conferences where men twice her age bowed their heads, called her Miss Harrington, and avoided eye contact. In 6 years, she had fired 12 executives. No one ever saw it coming. She didn't believe in warnings. She believed in results. And every night, standing before the wide glass window overlooking the glittering city of Houston, Sloane asked herself, did her mother ever feel lonely, flying alone over the sea? Did she ever think of her daughter? Or was the sky enough to fill every empty space? She never found the answer. As for DeAndre Miller, he lived in a completely different world, one of oil, metal, and blades slicing through wind. Once, he had been a senior aviation engineer in the military, responsible for maintaining Black Hawk and Apache helicopters in Iraq and Afghanistan. He could reassemble a turbine engine in the middle of a desert with nothing but a flashlight and a prayer. His wife, Monique, was a nurse. They met at a veterans hospital in Virginia. She was gentle, quiet, the kind of woman who remembered every birthday and left little notes in his lunchbox. Eat well, my hero. They had a daughter, Aaliyah. But after giving birth, Monique fell into a depression so deep she couldn't climb out. DeAndre took leave from the military. He tried everything: therapy, medication, long walks, until one morning he found her in the bathtub. Aaliyah was 7 months old. 2 weeks later, he left the service. He couldn't return to a world that demanded absolute focus, not when his daughter needed a father who was present. 7 years passed. DeAndre worked the night shift as a janitor at Harrington Aerodynamics. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent and Aaliyah's school fees. The hours fit perfectly. He could drop her off in the morning and pick her up after class. No one at the company knew he had once sat in Pentagon briefings. No one knew that in the back of his old truck, he still kept the military toolkit he used overseas. To them, he was just the janitor. And that was fine by him, because Aaliyah was everything. She loved robots, loved coding, and often asked, "Daddy, can you fix everything that's broken?" And he always answered, yes, even when he wasn't sure. Aaliyah had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. Every morning, she made him promise he'd come home safe. Every night, he told her a bedtime story, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. At 7, she believed her dad could do anything. DeAndre worked himself to the bone just to keep that belief alive. But some nights, alone in the silent hangar, with the scent of fuel and burnt rubber heavy in the air, he still heard the sound of rotors spinning in his head, still felt the weight of a wrench in his hands, knowing that one wrong move could mean someone never came back. He had left that world behind, but that world had never left him. That night, as he pushed his cleaning cart past the test bay, his gaze lingered, just for a second, on a gleaming white Airbus H-145. The Harrington logo shimmered blue beneath the floodlights. He stopped, just for a heartbeat. But sometimes, a single heartbeat is all it takes for fate to change its course. 3 weeks before the incident, DeAndre Miller was called up to the research hangar to clean after a test flight of the H-145. It was close to midnight. The engineers had all gone home. The hangar was heavy with the scent of fuel and burnt rubber. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly in the suffocating silence. He pushed his cart past the helicopter's sleek white frame, the blue Harrington logo glinting under the floodlights. DeAndre had always loved helicopters, the way they defied logic, hovering between earth and sky, as if they'd struck a secret bargain with gravity itself. As he mopped near the control console, his eyes caught on a monitor still glowing. Lines of data blinked: pressure, hydraulic flow, temperature zones. He froze. One of the readings was fluctuating, slightly, but consistently. A pressure imbalance in the turbine intake. Not dangerous. Yet. But it would be soon. DeAndre set the mop aside and moved closer, eyes scanning the data, the old instincts waking inside him. He had seen this before. In Mosul, on a Chinook flying through a sandstorm. The fix was simple, if caught early, and catastrophic, if ignored. Just then, he heard the sharp click of heels striking concrete. Sloane Harrington emerged from the control room, tablet in hand, her face taut and alert. She saw him standing beside the console. Too close. Her eyes narrowed. Her voice was like ice. "What do you think you're doing here?" DeAndre immediately stepped back. "Just cleaning, ma'am." She didn't believe him. Her gaze flicked from the monitor to his face, precise and cold as a laser. "You were looking at the data." "No, ma'am, I just—" "Security." She didn't have to raise her voice. 2 guards appeared within 30 seconds. They escorted him out and warned him he was to work only in the restrooms from now on. DeAndre didn't explain. He didn't resist. He just nodded and walked away. He had long since learned. Some people never want to hear the truth, especially when it comes from a man holding a mop. That night, in her office, Sloane replayed the security footage. She watched DeAndre pause at the monitor, saw him lean in, eyes tracking the numbers with unusual focus. But she also noticed another clip, earlier that evening. A technician had slipped on leaking hydraulic oil near the stairs. DeAndre ran over, caught him before he fell, handed him half a sandwich, and helped him to the medical station. Sloane watched that clip twice. That man might have been a janitor, but he moved through the hangar as if he belonged there, as if he had once worked among those machines in another lifetime. She closed the file and saved it in a folder labeled Personnel Notes. Then she forgot about it. 3 weeks passed. DeAndre kept his rhythm, clock in at 11 p.m., out at 7 a.m., mop floors, empty bins, keep his head down. Sometimes he saw Sloane walk by with her assistants and engineers. She never looked at him. He preferred it that way. Invisibility was safe. Invisibility was simple. But he still remembered that pressure number. He checked the maintenance log online. No flags raised, no notes left. No one had noticed. He thought about leaving an anonymous message. Then he gave a weary smile. Who would believe a janitor? So he said nothing. He returned to his small, quiet world. In the mornings, he cooked breakfast for Aaliyah. In the afternoons, he helped her with homework. At night, he read her stories about astronauts and explorers, and he told himself, the helicopter wasn't his problem anymore. He had left that world behind. Now he was a father, and that was enough. But there was something he didn't know. Aaliyah had been working for 2 months on her robotics project, a small rover she designed and programmed to navigate obstacles using sensors. The regional robotics competition was set for the end of the month, and the grand prize was a full scholarship to the STEM summer camp at Rice University. Aaliyah wanted to win more than anything. She drew pictures of herself in a white lab coat, practiced her presentation in front of the bathroom mirror, and dreamed of hearing her name announced before the judges. But 3 weeks ago, the lab at Lanier Middle School, with its perfect lighting, 3D printer, and soldering station, was shut down for electrical repairs. Just a few days, they said. Then a week. Then, maybe next month. Since then, Aaliyah had been working under a flickering desk lamp in their kitchen, using cheap tools DeAndre bought from the local hardware store. He called the school twice, left messages. No one replied. 2 days before the competition, the lab was still dark. That night, Aaliyah sat at the kitchen table, her rover motionless before her. Her eyes were red, but she tried not to cry. "Daddy, do you think I can still win?" DeAndre knelt down, meeting her gaze. "You're going to win." Because that's what fathers do. They say yes, even when they're not sure, even when the whole world turns its back, even when their daughters are working in the dark. But inside, something cracked. Because Aaliyah deserved better. She deserved light. She deserved a fair chance. And he, a man who once kept helicopters alive under fire, couldn't even fix a simple lamp for his little girl. That night, after tucking Aaliyah into bed, DeAndre sat quietly on the old couch. The room was dark except for the ticking clock. He thought about Monique, about their last conversation. She had sat on that same couch, eyes distant. "I'm sorry that I can't be the mother she deserves." "You are the mother she deserves," he'd said. "You just need time." But time had run out. 3 days later, he found her in the bathtub. From that moment, DeAndre understood there were things that couldn't be fixed. Monique's depression, the nightmares that jolted him awake at 3 a.m., the empty half of the bed. But there were things that could be fixed. Engines, wiring, pressure valves, problems with logic, with a process from broken to whole. And if fixing that helicopter could bring back Aaliyah's light, her lab, her chance, then he would fix it, even if it cost him his life. On the morning of the test flight, the H-145 refused to start. The ignition sequence spun. Fuel lines were clear. Diagnostics displayed. Normal. But the engine stayed silent. Engineers from MIT, Caltech, and Oxford crowded around the machine like surgeons surrounding a dying patient. They reran the sequence, replaced components, recalibrated systems. Nothing worked. Sloane Harrington stood in the center of the hangar, hands clasped behind her back, jaw locked. This wasn't just a test flight. It was a demonstration for a potential client. Gulf Coast Med Air from Galveston. A $40 million contract. If the helicopter didn't fly, the deal collapsed. And if the deal collapsed, 3 more contracts would fall right after it, like a line of cold, merciless dominoes. Her reputation was built on absolute reliability. No delays, no errors, no good enough. This could not happen. Not today. She turned, scanning the hangar for an answer. And then she saw him, DeAndre Miller, mopping the floor in the distance. Except he wasn't mopping. He was watching. Specifically, watching the pressure valve casing near the turbine intake. His head tilted slightly, as if he were listening to a sound no one else could hear. His eyes followed the body of the aircraft with a focus that didn't belong to someone in a janitor's uniform. Something flickered in Sloane's chest. Irritation? Curiosity? She couldn't tell. She walked toward him. The engineers fell silent. Her heels struck the concrete, sharp, deliberate. She stopped 5 steps away. "You." DeAndre looked up. His face was calm, unreadable. "Yes, ma'am." "You've been staring at that helicopter for 10 minutes, she said, pointing toward the H-145. "Do you see something we don't?" A few engineers chuckled. One leaned to whisper to another. Someone laughed out loud. Sloane didn't smile. She just looked at DeAndre, silent, waiting. Then she said the line everyone in that hangar would remember. "Let's make a deal. If you can fix this helicopter, I'll kiss you. Right here, in front of everyone." The air froze. Somewhere, a tablet beeped softly. No one moved to silence it. DeAndre didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, then at the helicopter, then back at her. His voice was deep, steady. And if I can't? Sloane folded her arms. You're fired. No severance, no insurance, no last paycheck. She paused, just long enough for each word to fall like the edge of a blade. Do we have a deal? Dr. Walter Green, lead engineer, mid-50s, his Caltech ring gleaming, spoke up in protest. Ms. Harrington, with respect, he's just a janitor. He's not authorized to— I know exactly who he is. Sloane's voice cut through his like glass. She never broke eye contact with DeAndre. Do we have a deal? DeAndre stood still, mop handle in hand. He thought of Aaliyah, her robotics competition that evening, the dark lab that had been closed for weeks, the promise he made every morning. Daddy will come home safe. Then he set the mop down. Without a word, he walked toward the H-145. The engineers instinctively stepped back. Sloane watched, expression unreadable. A young engineer, Imran Qureshi, raised his phone to record. Someone glanced at their watch. 11:47 a.m. DeAndre stopped in front of the engine. He didn't touch it right away. He just stood there, quiet, observing. Then he placed his hand on the metal surface, tracing the engine's body, feeling each joint, each weld, each cold line of steel. And for the first time in 7 years, DeAndre Miller was no longer a janitor. He was an engineer again. No one in that hangar knew. DeAndre Miller had spent 6 years keeping Blackhawks and Apaches alive in war, where one mistake meant death. He had patched bullet holes in rotor blades with metal sheets and aerospace epoxy, rewired control panels by flashlight while mortar shells thundered 100 meters away. Even jump-started a downed Blackhawk with a car battery and cables after the auxiliary power unit was blown apart. He had been decorated twice, commended 4 times, and walked away from it all, the day he buried his wife. Now he worked the night shift, came home to a 7-year-old daughter named Aaliyah, who loved robots and often asked, "Daddy, why is the sky blue?" She had her mother's dark eyes, her father's stubborn chin. Every morning before school, she made him promise 3 things. Come home safe. Don't forget lunch. Help me with my project. She had spent 2 months building a small rover that could navigate obstacles using self-coded sensors. The regional robotics competition was that very evening. The prize, a full scholarship to the STEM summer camp at Rice University. Aaliyah wanted to win more than anything, but the school lab had been closed for 3 weeks due to an electrical wiring issue. They said it would be fixed soon. Then a week. Then next month. So she worked under a flickering kitchen lamp using cheap tools DeAndre bought from a hardware store. He called the school twice. No one responded. So when Sloane Harrington issued her challenge, DeAndre didn't think about salary, or pride, or job security. He thought about Aaliyah, about the light in that dark room, about the way her face had lit up when she asked, "Daddy, do you really think I can win?" And he had said, "Yes." Because that's what fathers do. They say yes, even when they're not sure, even when the whole world says no, even when their daughters are working in the dark. DeAndre had learned there were things that couldn't be fixed. Monique's depression, the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m., the empty half of the bed. But there were things that could be fixed. Engines, wires, pressure valves. Things that made sense, that followed logic from broken to whole. And if fixing this helicopter meant bringing back Aaliyah's light, her lab, her chance, then he would fix it. Even if it cost him everything. He remembered that last evening with Monique, 3 days before she was gone. She sat on the couch, eyes hollow. "I'm sorry that I can't be the mother she deserves." You are the mother she deserves, he told her. You just need more time. But time ran out. Now, when Aaliyah asked about her mother, he told her she was kind, brilliant, and loved her deeply. He never mentioned the bathtub, the cold water, the sound that tore from his throat when he found her. Aaliyah didn't need to know that. She only needed to know her mother loved her, and her father would never leave. So DeAndre stood before the H-145, rolled up his sleeves, and decided that, at least today, one thing would be right. DeAndre knelt beside the H-145 and peered into the turbine intake. The light was too dim, so he pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, the same one he used to look under sinks and behind vending machines. He shone it onto the intake valve assembly and immediately saw what the engineers had missed: a thin, almost invisible layer of metallic dust coating the inner surface of the pressurization chamber. It was the kind of rare failure that only appeared under harsh conditions. He'd seen it once in Mosul, on a Chinook flying through a sandstorm, sucking in particles so fine they slipped past every filter and choked the compression system from within. The diagnostics didn't flag it because this wasn't an electrical fault. This was physics, mechanics, the sort of problem that required hands, not a computer. DeAndre stood, turned back to face Sloan and the engineering team. It's the pressure valve assembly. It's clogged. Metallic dust. Diagnostics won't catch it because it's not a sensor error. It's a physical obstruction inside the compression chamber. Dr. Green scoffed. Metallic dust? We ran a full system purge this morning. Standard protocol. Not deep enough, DeAndre replied evenly. You have to remove the valve housing, hand clean the entire interior surface, and check the compressor intake for buildup. If you don't, it'll run fine on the ground, but fail under load within 3 days. Imran Qureshi, a young engineer with an Oxford badge on his lanyard, stepped forward. And how exactly would you know that? Do you have an aerospace engineering degree we don't know about? DeAndre didn't answer. He looked only at Sloan. She studied him with an unreadable expression. No longer mocking, calculating, assessing. You have until 2 o'clock, she said, her tone steady, but carrying the faintest undercurrent of curiosity. Or maybe just the thin hope that she wouldn't have to call Galveston to cancel the demo. If this machine is airborne before 2, you get the kiss and you keep your job. If not, you're fired. No severance, no insurance, no final paycheck. She glanced at her watch. Clock starts now. Sloan turned on her heel and headed for the office, her stilettos cracking dryly against the concrete. The engineers drifted off, murmuring. A few lingered to watch. Most didn't believe he even knew how to remove the cowling properly. DeAndre stood alone beside the helicopter. He checked the time. 11:47 a.m. He had 2 hours and 13 minutes. Again, he thought of Aaliyah, of the darkened lab, of the flickering desk lamp, of her trying to solder when she could barely see. She had never complained. She only looked at him with solemn eyes and said, "Daddy, it's okay. I can do it." But she shouldn't have to do it like that. She was only 7. She deserved good lighting, proper tools, and a fair shot. DeAndre drew a long breath. He went to the supply room, unlocked a cabinet, and pulled out a duffel stashed behind the cleaning gear. Inside was the old toolkit, military grade. Some pieces he'd bought out of pocket during his service. Some he'd fabricated himself in the base machine shop. He'd told himself 100 times he should sell it. He didn't need it anymore. He'd left that life. But he had never let go. He carried the bag back to the hangar, set it beside the H-145, and unzipped it with deliberate calm. Under the fluorescent lights, the tools gleamed. A torque wrench, precision screwdrivers, a digital multimeter, a fiber-optic bore scope he'd once won in a poker game in Kandahar. He picked up the first tool, a ratcheting wrench with a self-wrapping handle. It fit his hand as if it had never left. And for the first time in 7 years, DeAndre Miller stopped pretending to be someone else. He went to work. He began by removing the engine cowling. 6 bolts, each requiring a precise torque sequence to prevent warping the cover. He worked quickly, but surely, his hands guided by the muscle memory of thousands of identical motions. The remaining engineers exchanged looks. Something in their eyes had changed. This wasn't the clumsy fumbling of an amateur. This was precision. In 8 minutes, the cowling lay neatly on a clean tarp he'd just spread. Next, he disconnected the wiring to the pressure valve assembly. 12 color-coded connections, readable at a glance, only to someone fluent in military standards, different from civilian. He removed them in exact order, labeling each with small strips of tape from the kit. Then came the valve housing, a complex component regulating differential pressure in flight. To remove it, he had to break 3 hydraulic lines and a row of sensors. One misstep meant a flood of fluid or a shattered sensor worth $12,000. Here, he slowed down. Absolute caution. He could feel the eyes on his back. Someone was filming. He didn't care. At 12:23 p.m., he lifted the valve housing free, heavier than expected. He carried it to the bench, set it down, and opened it. Inside was exactly that metallic dust. He'd been right. Microfiber cloth, approved aviation solvent, bore scope tracing every seam. The dust flaked off gradually, revealing clean metal beneath. While the housing dried, he moved to the compressor intake, harder to reach. He removed an access panel, then reached into a narrow bay barely wide enough for an arm. He used a vacuum probe to pull out the particulate. Working blind, guided only by touch and experience. Sweat pricked at his temples. His shoulders ached from the angle. He kept going. At 1:14 p.m., he withdrew his arm. The suction tube was filmed with a fine layer of metallic dust. He had gotten it all. He reinstalled the valve housing, reattached the hydraulic lines, reconnected the sensor array. Every connection had to be exact. Every bolt at the right torque. Get one step wrong, and the engine wouldn't just fail to start. It could catastrophically fail in flight. At 1:38 p.m., he clicked in the final electrical connector. His hands were greasy even through the gloves. His back ached. His knees were numb from kneeling on concrete. But the job was nearly done. He ran a manual pressure test with the gauge from his kit. The needle climbed steadily. No flutter. No drop. Good. He closed the cowling, torqued the bolts in sequence, then stepped back. More engineers had returned. Word traveled fast. One person called another. 24 eyes watched. At 1:50 p.m., Sloane appeared. She said nothing, only folded her arms, her face unreadable. DeAndre wiped his hands on a rag, looked up. Test it now. Sloane strode to the pilot's door, climbed into the seat, and reached for the ignition. The hangar went still. The ventilation fans hummed. Someone coughed softly. Sloane turned the key. The starter motor wound up. The turbine spun, slow at first, then faster. The rotor trembled, then began to turn smoothly. The engine roared, silky and strong, filling the hangar with the sound everyone wanted to hear. The H-145 lifted 6 inches, hovering steady. Perfect. Then it settled back down. Sloane shut it off. The blades slowed. Stopped. Silence returned. Heavier than before. She stepped out of the cockpit, walked up to DeAndre, and stopped 3 paces away. All eyes were on them. Phones held high. They wanted to know. Would the Ice Queen of Houston actually kiss the janitor? DeAndre pulled off his gloves, looked straight at her, and said the words no one expected. "I don't need your kiss." DeAndre's voice was soft, yet it carried, rippling through the hangar like the clear ring of metal catching the wind. Sloane froze. Her face remained composed, but in her eyes something flickered. Confusion. Perhaps even surprise. DeAndre wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a black streak of grease across his temple. "I just need the lights in my daughter's lab turned back on." Silence. Not a word from anyone. "She has a robotics competition tonight," he continued, voice even and calm. "She's been working in the dark for 2 weeks. She's building an autonomous rover, one she programmed herself. She deserves a fair chance." His gaze met hers, not pleading, not afraid, but steady. "That's all I want. Just the light, so my little girl can see what she's built." The vast hangar went utterly still. No one moved. One of the engineers quietly lowered his phone. Another looked down at the concrete floor. Sloane remained standing, arms crossed, her face a cold mask. But inside, something shifted. Slow, deep, and strange. "What's your daughter's name?" Her voice had dropped a register. Softer now. "Aaliyah." DeAndre didn't waver. "She's 7. Smarter than I ever was. She programmed that rover herself. I don't need money. I don't need a raise. I just need light, so she can see what she's created." A long, heavy breath passed between them. Sloane felt her chest tighten. A feeling she couldn't remember the last time she'd had. Shame. Not the performative kind she'd used in boardrooms when someone called her cold or ruthless, but real shame, the kind that lodged in the throat and twisted the gut. She had turned this man into entertainment, turned his dignity into a wager in front of an audience of engineers, people who had all failed to do what he'd accomplished in 2 hours. And he hadn't done it for recognition. Not for her. He'd done it for a 7-year-old girl, soldering circuits under a flickering lamp, a girl with the most important night of her life ahead of her. "It's done." Her voice came out drier than she intended. "The lights will be back on tonight." "You have my word." DeAndre nodded. No smile, no thanks. Just a single nod. Then he turned and began packing his tools. Sloane stood there a moment longer. Then she turned away, her heels echoing through the quiet space. The engineers dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves. A few forced, awkward laughs. One muttered a half-joke about the janitor who fixed a helicopter. But most said nothing, because they had just witnessed something rare. A man who refused glory for a purer reason, and a woman who ruled Houston's skies, was forced to confront the truth that she'd been wrong. Back in her office, Sloane shut the door and stood motionless, staring out the glass wall. She felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. She sat at her desk, opened her computer, and typed his name into the company database. DeAndre Miller, Employee ID, 4732. Position, janitorial staff, night shift. Hired 7 years ago, the profile opened. Education, BS in Mechanical Engineering, University of Virginia, minor, Aeronautical Systems, GPA, 3.9 military service, U.S. Army, Aviation Maintenance Division, 2009 to 2017, rank at discharge, warrant officer, 2, specialty, rotary aircraft systems, honorable discharge, reason for separation. Family circumstances, awards, Army Commendation Medal, 2, Army Achievement Medal, 2, Joint Service Achievement Medal. Sloane stared at the screen. Her hand trembled slightly as she moved the mouse, clicking on his ID photo from 7 years ago. A younger version of the man she'd humiliated looked back at her. short hair, clean-shaven, eyes as resolute as today. He wore a suit, an interview suit, the kind you wear when you're trying to start over. She took a long breath, closed the file, and picked up her phone. "Ramon Vega," she said when the line connected, "turn the lights back on in the Lanier Middle School lab." Tonight her tone was sharp, unyielding. "I don't care about cost. Pull electricians from another project if you have to. Just get it done." "Yes, ma'am, but may I ask?" "No." She hung up, then sat back and tilted her head toward the ceiling. In that moment, the years of clawing her way to power came flooding back. She remembered her father, the stroke that nearly took him. The day she walked into the boardroom at 28 and declared she was taking over the company. Half the board walked out. The other half lawyered up. She fired 6 executives in a month, rebuilt from the ashes, and told herself that made her strong. But now, she wasn't so sure. She thought of DeAndre's eyes when he said, "I don't need your kiss." They hadn't been angry or bitter, just tired. As if he'd seen too much loss for this moment to even register. She thought of Aliyah, 7 years old, bent over a kitchen table, soldering in the dark. And she thought of herself, also 7, sitting in her mother's Cessna, learning to read altitude, learning to feel the wind. Back when flying was still magic, before it became a business, before everything became contracts and control. Her phone buzzed, a text from Priya. "The Galveston clients are asking about the test flight. Should I postpone?" Sloan looked at the message, then typed back, "No. Tell them the demonstration is still on. 3 p.m. We're ready." She set the phone down and turned to the window. Below, she saw DeAndre Miller packing up his tools, loading the bag onto his cart. Somewhere else, a 7-year-old girl was waiting for her father, waiting to hear that the lights had come back on. Sloan pressed her palm to her eyes. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since her mother's funeral. But this time, she felt close. A raw, aching feeling. Painful, but unmistakably human. Out in the parking lot, DeAndre sat behind the wheel of his old truck. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. He had just done something he thought he'd never have to do again. Opened a part of himself he'd buried long ago. Now, there was only one thing left. Go home. See Aliyah. Tell her the lights were back on. Then keep living. Keep pretending this world was fair, even when he knew it wasn't. DeAndre wiped his face, drew a deep breath, started the engine, and drove off. Into the blinding afternoon sun, toward the light he had just fought for. The light waiting for his daughter. That afternoon, Sloan sat in her office, unable to focus on anything. The quarterly financial report was open on her screen. She had read the same line 5 times, and still hadn't absorbed a single word. She kept thinking about DeAndre, about the way he had knelt beside the engine, about the toolkit in that worn duffel bag. Neatly organized, professional. Not the kind of thing bought from a hardware store on a whim. About how he worked, as if every motion were etched into his muscles, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. Warrant Officer 2, Aviation Maintenance Division, Iraq and Afghanistan. She had looked down on him, humiliated him in front of his peers, turned his dignity into a public wager, and yet he hadn't demanded an apology, hadn't sought recognition. He had only asked for light, for his daughter. Sloan opened her desk drawer, took out her personal phone, the one with only 3 numbers saved. She added a 4th. Ramon Vega answered after 2 rings. "Miss Harrington? Are the lab lights on yet?" "Yes, ma'am." "We sent 2 electricians. They just reported that the system's fully operational. All lights on. The 3D printer tested, soldering stations working. Sloane closed her eyes. Good. Thank you, ma'am. If I may ask, why are we… Because a 7-year-old girl needs to finish her robot. She hung up before he could respond. That night, DeAndre drove Aaliyah to the school. She hugged the small rover against her chest, her eyes shining, a mix of excitement and nerves. Daddy, do you think I'll do okay? DeAndre pulled over and turned to face her. You know what I think? What? I think you're the smartest person I've ever met. And you've worked harder than anyone else in that competition. So yes, I think you'll do great. Aaliyah pressed her lips together, the same way she'd learned from him whenever she was trying not to cry. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby. They walked into the school together. Turning down the hallway toward the lab, Aaliyah suddenly stopped. The lights were on. Not the flicker of a desk lamp, but real light. Bright. Even. Professional. The whole room glowed like daylight. She looked up at DeAndre, eyes wide. Did you fix it? DeAndre knelt beside her. Someone did. What matters is, now you have light. Come on. You've got a robot to show off. That night, Aaliyah didn't win first place. She came in second. But when the judges announced she'd received the full STEM scholarship to the Rice University summer camp, Aaliyah cried, tears of pure happiness. DeAndre hugged her tight, chest aching, reminding himself not to cry. Not here, not in front of the crowd. But when Aaliyah looked up, the silver medal glinting at her neck, and whispered, Daddy, you kept your promise. He almost lost it. On the drive home, Aaliyah fell asleep in the back seat, medal still around her neck. DeAndre watched her in the rearview mirror and thought about the day, about the helicopter, about Sloane, about the feeling of holding his tools again after 7 years. It was as if some long silent part of him had awakened, and he wasn't sure how he felt about that. The next evening, Sloane stood in the employee parking lot. She told herself she was just there to inspect, a routine quality check. But she knew that was a lie. She was looking for him. DeAndre's old Ford F-150 sat in the far corner, a dent in the tailgate, a faded veteran sticker on the bumper. He was under the truck, tools spread across the asphalt, his legs sticking out. Sloane walked closer. The sharp click of her heels made him pause. He slid out from under the chassis, saw her, and sat up. His hands were smeared with grease, surprise flickering briefly across his face. Miss Harrington? I owe you an apology. The words came out stiff, formal. She drew a breath and said them again, quieter. What I did yesterday was wrong. I used you as a spectacle, turned your skill into entertainment, your dignity into a wager. That was cruel. I'm sorry. DeAndre wiped his hands on a rag. He didn't look angry, just tired. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Aaliyah. I know. She paused. Did she win? Second place. But she got into the summer camp, full scholarship. He smiled, a real smile that changed his whole face. She cried when I told her. Happy tears. I hadn't seen that in a long time. That tightening in Sloane's chest returned. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is an invitation to next month's company gala. Formal attire. It's usually just board members and investors, but I'd like you and Aaliyah to come. There'll be a robotics exhibition. MIT is bringing some of their competition models. I think she'd love it. DeAndre looked at the envelope, but didn't take it right away. Why? Because I want to apologize properly. And because your daughter sounds remarkable. She should meet people who understand what she's building. Sloane held the envelope out. No pressure, just an invitation. If you'd rather not come, I'll understand. DeAndre accepted it at last and opened it. The paper was thick, embossed with the Harrington Aerodynamics seal. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Sloane turned to leave, then hesitated. DeAndre? Yes? Thank you for fixing the helicopter. And thank you for reminding me what humility looks like. I think I'd forgotten she left before he could reply. Back in her car, a black Tesla worth more than 3 years of his salary. She sat still for a long moment, hands on the wheel, eyes unfocused. Then she started the engine and drove home. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Aaliyah, the 7-year-old girl soldering circuits under a flickering lamp. About DeAndre refusing a kiss just to ask for light. At 2 a.m., she got up, made coffee, and opened her laptop on the kitchen counter. She logged into the company's charitable fund account and typed, Lanier Middle School. She approved a $50,000 grant for new equipment for the STEM lab, the robotics program, and scholarships for students who couldn't afford competition costs. She hit send, closed the laptop, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. 3 weeks later, Aaliyah won first place at the regional robotics finals. Her little rover cleared the obstacle course in under 2 minutes, faster than every other competitor. The judges called it innovative, elegant, and far beyond her age. Sloane was there. She sat quietly in the back row, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. No makeup, no jewelry, just another parent in the crowd. She watched Aaliyah's face light up as her name was announced. Watched DeAndre lift his daughter onto his shoulders while she raised the trophy high like a champion. And in that moment, Sloane felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Joy. Not the cold satisfaction of closing a multi-million-dollar deal, but real human joy. Warm, simple, and pure. After the ceremony, Aaliyah spotted her and ran over. Are you my daddy's boss? Sloane crouched down so their eyes met. Something like that. Are you his girlfriend? Sloane froze for a beat. She glanced at DeAndre a few steps away. He was trying not to laugh. No, she said carefully. Just a friend. Oh. Aaliyah's face fell a little. I think you're pretty. Sloane's throat tightened. Thank you, Aaliyah. You're incredibly smart. Aaliyah grinned, then darted back to her father, chattering excitedly while showing him something on her tablet. Sloane stood slowly. DeAndre walked over. Sorry about that. She's been asking a lot of questions lately. It's fine, Sloane said, smiling. Thank you for coming. It means a lot to both Moth. She caught herself, smiled again. To both of you. I wouldn't have missed it, he said simply. A week later, Sloane called DeAndre into her office. She offered him a position as senior test engineer. Full benefits, triple his current salary, and a signing bonus. He declined. I appreciate the offer. Truly. But I don't want to go back to a world where people are measured by titles. I'm good where I am. I get to be there for Aaliyah. That's what matters. Sloane didn't argue. She just nodded. Because for the first time in her life, she understood. Success didn't always mean climbing higher. Sometimes it meant knowing when you'd already reached the right summit. Still, something between them had shifted. Something neither of them could quite name. He began lingering a few extra minutes after his shift to talk. She began coming in a bit earlier, just to catch him before he left. They talked about helicopters, about Aaliyah's projects, about small things that somehow felt important, and the important things that didn't need to be said. And slowly, quietly, without either of them planning it, something began to grow. A month later, Sloane was scheduled to observe the test flight of the H-145, A routine maintenance check and final certification before delivery to Gulf Coast Med-Air. She arrived early and found DeAndre coordinating the ground crew. He was no longer wearing a janitor's uniform. He wore a flight suit and a safety vest. She walked toward him. "I thought you turned down the engineering position." He looked up. "I did. But they asked me to consult on safety procedures for the test flights. Temporary contract." I said yes. "Why?" "Because Aaliyah asked if I'd ever fly again." I told her I didn't need to. She said, "But Daddy, you love helicopters." He smiled softly. She was right. Turns out, you can't hide from a 7-year-old. Sloane laughed. A real laugh. Light and unguarded. After the flight, flawless, successful, she met him near the H-145. The sunset washed the runway in gold and amber. The helicopter gleamed like something out of a dream. She approached, holding a piece of cloth in her hand. He recognized it instantly, the rag he had used to wipe his hands that day. "I kept this," she said quietly, "from the day you saved the project." DeAndre looked at her. "Why?" "Because it reminds me that I'm not always right, and that sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who change everything." She stepped closer. Her heartbeat quickened. "Do you remember what I said about the kiss that day?" "I remember. I didn't mean it. It was cruel. And I'm sorry." Sloane met his gaze. "But I'd like to make a new offer." "What kind of offer?" Her voice trembled, rare for a woman who had faced hostile boardrooms without blinking. "I want the first kiss to be because I love you. Not because you fixed something." DeAndre's breath caught. He looked into her eyes and saw a woman who had spent her life building walls, now ready to let them fall. But he also saw Monique, the bathtub, the 3 a.m. awakenings, heart-pounding, disoriented and lost. He had loved once. It had nearly destroyed him. "Sloane," his voice was low, rough. "I'm not sure I remember how to do this." "Do what?" "Love someone, without being afraid they'll disappear." She touched his cheek, gently. "I'm not sure I remember either. I've spent 20 years convincing myself love was weakness, that loneliness was safer." She paused, voice trembling. "But since I met you, it feels like I've been living underwater. And now, for the first time, I can breathe." DeAndre thought of Aaliyah, of how she'd asked about the pretty lady Miss Sloane, of her smile whenever he mentioned her. His daughter knew. Somehow that 7-year-old already knew. He thought of Monique and her last words, "You deserve to be happy, DeAndre. Promise me you'll find it." Back then, he hadn't promised. He hadn't believed he deserved it. Not after everything. But now, with Sloane standing before him, her eyes full of hope and fear, he realized Monique would have wanted this. She would have wanted him to live again. For Aaliyah to have a kind woman in her life. For him to stop punishing himself for what he couldn't save. He reached for Sloane's hand. "Are you sure?" She nodded, eyes glimmering. "I've never been surer of anything in my life." The H-145 rested silently behind them. The sky turned violet. Somewhere, a bird sang. DeAndre leaned in. Sloane rose on her toes. And they kissed, gently, slowly. Not for a bet, not for a challenge, but because somewhere between engines and apologies, between a little girl and a dream, two broken people had found a way to be whole again. When they pulled apart, Sloane rested her forehead against his. "Aaliyah's not going to let this go quietly." DeAndre laughed softly. "Yeah, she'll say she knew all along. Maybe she did." They stood there, watching the sun sink and the stars begin to appear. And for the first time in many years, Sloane Harrington felt she was exactly where she belonged. Not in a boardroom, not in a penthouse, but here, with him, under the same sky where helicopters and love learn to fly. The next morning, Aaliyah was sitting at the breakfast table when DeAndre walked into the kitchen. She looked at him and smiled, that all-knowing smile only 7-year-olds can pull off. "Did you talk to Miss Sloane?" DeAndre poured cereal. "I did." "Why do you ask?" "Because you're smiling. You only smile like that when you're with me, or when you talk about her." He sat down, watching her. "You're too smart for your own good, you know that?" "My mom was smart too," Aaliyah said seriously. "You told me. Do you think Mommy would like Miss Sloane?" DeAndre's heart tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. I think she'd like her very much." "Good." Aaliyah nodded firmly. "Because I like her. And I think Mommy wants you to be happy." His throat closed up. "Do you know how much I love you?" "A lot. More than all the stars." 2 weeks later, Sloane invited DeAndre and Aaliyah to the company gala at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Aaliyah wore a blue dress with pockets. She insisted on pockets for her tools. DeAndre wore a suit for the first time in 7 years. Sloane met them at the entrance in a simple black dress, her hair loose instead of the usual tight bun. Aaliyah looked at her, wide-eyed. "You're really pretty." Sloane knelt down to meet her gaze. "Thank you. You look wonderful, too. Ready to meet some robots?" "Really?" Aaliyah almost jumped. "Really?" The MIT team brought 3 competition robots. They're looking for young engineers to talk to. The evening unfolded like a dream. Aaliyah spent over an hour chatting with the MIT researchers, her eyes glowing as they explained AI and machine learning. They gave her business cards and told her to stay in touch. DeAndre stood nearby, one arm lightly around Sloane's waist, watching his daughter bloom. "Thank you for this," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me what really matters," she replied. When Aaliyah grew tired and fell asleep on her father's shoulder, they walked out to the parking lot under the starry Houston sky. Sloane watched the two of them and felt something shift deep inside her, a feeling she thought would never return. Belonging. 6 months later, Sloane stood in the hangar at Ellington Field, looking at a brand-new white H-145 with a blue stripe. DeAndre stood beside her, no longer a janitor, but a technical advisor working his own flexible hours so he could still be with Aaliyah. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think it's the most beautiful machine I've ever seen. It's for the community medical program, to fly into rural areas without hospitals." She turned to him. "I named it Aaliyah." DeAndre's breath caught. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to. She reminds me that the best thing we can do is bring light to those still in the dark, just like someone once did for her." That night, after tucking Aaliyah into bed, DeAndre found Sloane standing in the kitchen, the one she now spent half her time in. She looked out the window, holding a cup of tea. "You okay?" he asked. "I was thinking about my mother. The night she flew alone. How I was angry at her for leaving." She turned, her voice soft. "But maybe she didn't leave. Maybe she just got lost. Like I was lost. Until I met you," DeAndre pulled her into his arms. "I was lost for a long time, too." They stood there in the quiet kitchen, listening to Aaliyah's steady breathing from the next room. And for the first time since Monique's passing, DeAndre felt he could finally look forward, instead of back. 1 year later, at the STEM summer camp graduation at Rice University, 8-year-old Aaliyah stood before the crowd, presenting her final project, a robot designed to detect and move toward sources of light, built for search and rescue missions. "I call it the Light of Hope," she said. her voice clear and confident. "Because my dad taught me that everyone deserves light, even when they're stuck in the dark." In the audience, DeAndre squeezed Sloane's hand, fighting back tears. After the ceremony, they took Aaliyah out for ice cream. She sat between them, the metal gleaming on her chest, chattering non-stop about her next ideas. "One day, I'll build a robot that can fix helicopters." "Like you," Dad DeAndre laughed. "Why not make a helicopter robot instead?" Aaliyah's eyes lit up. "Dad, you're a genius." Sloane smiled, watching father and daughter together, and thought of her own mother, of that lonely flight into the night, chasing something she never quite found. But Sloane had found it, not in boardrooms or penthouses, not in success or power, but here, in a small ice cream shop, with the man who once mopped floors and the little girl who dreamed of robots. This was where she belonged. That night, after Aaliyah had fallen asleep, DeAndre and Sloane stood on the small balcony, looking out at the Houston skyline. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. "No. I thought I'd be mopping floors until Aaliyah grew up. Then, I didn't really know." "And now?" He turned to her, moonlight in his eyes. "Now, I think, sometimes things break for a reason, so we can learn how to fix them." Together, Sloane smiled, her eyes stinging. "That's the best line I've ever heard." "I learned it from my daughter," he said. "She told me everything can be fixed, if you have the right tools and enough light." She's right. And somewhere across the city, the helicopter named Aaliyah rested quietly in its hangar, ready for its next morning flight. White and blue, spotless and perfect, like every good beginning. And like every kind story, this one truly began when someone dared to say, "I don't need your kiss. I just need the light." Someone heard it, really heard it, and chose to become that light. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for staying with us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next episode. And tell us in the comments, which moment touched you most? And what light would you want to bring to someone else?